Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And may the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you.
Welcome to the deep dive.
So I want you to imagine holding a blueprint. And this blueprint tells you exactly how a physical structure like, say, a massive, towering skyscraper is going to collapse.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right, because it's all math and physics, you know.
Yeah.
You could look at the load-bearing walls or the stress points in the steel, and you can predict down to the millisecond when the concrete will crack. We've mastered that kind of science.
We definitely have. Engineering is pretty exact.
Exactly. But now, imagine trying to find a blueprint for the collapse of the human soul.
Oh, wow. That's a pivot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because for the last century or so, modern psychology has essentially tried to convince us that, well, there is no soul to collapse.
Right. Just biology.
Exactly. Just that we're highly evolved, incredibly selfish primates, driven entirely by base urges. And honestly, if you just turn on the news today, it's pretty easy to believe that.
It's very easy to fall into that cynical trap, yeah.
But what if an 8-sentence text, spoken in the 7th century Arabian desert, completely dismantled that cynical theory?
I mean, that is a massive claim, and yet that is exactly the intellectual and spiritual terrain we are stepping into today.
We really are. Today's deep dive is a comprehensive verse-by-verse exploration of Surah at-Tin.
Which is the 95th chapter of the Quran.
Right, which translates to the fig. And, the scale of this text compared to its actual length is what I find just deeply fascinating.
It's incredibly dense.
It is merely 8 verses. I mean, if you have it memorized, you can probably recite it in under 40 seconds.
Easily under 40 seconds.
But here we are sitting in the studio with a stack of over 150 scholarly texts just trying to unpack those 40 seconds. We have classical linguistic treatises, we've got complex theological arguments.
And some deeply modern psychological analyses, too.
Yeah, totally. And my first instinct when looking at this mountain of source material was like, isn't this overkill?
It does look intimidating.
Right. Why do we need a massive, centuries-old scholarly ecosystem just to understand 8 short verses about a fig and an olive? It feels like we're overcomplicating a simple message.
I completely understand that reaction. I really do. Especially today, in an era where we want everything distilled into a 30-second video clip.
Oh, absolutely. Give me the bullet points.
Exactly. So hauling out 150 classical volumes feels archaic. But you have to view this scholarly toolkit not as an overcomplication, but as a defense mechanism. We need this rigor to protect the text from ourselves.
Wait, from ourselves, you mean like our own personal biases?
Exactly that, because the human ego is a master at bending divine or philosophical texts to validate whatever it currently desires.
Oh, for sure. People cherry-pick quotes all the time.
They do. If you just hand someone a translated text without any methodology or guardrails, they will project their own cultural baggage, their modern political leanings, or even their personal insecurities right onto the verses.
They'll make the text say whatever they want it to say.
Yeah, precisely. And the Orthodox Sunni tradition refuses to let that happen. It relies on a hyper-strict empirical hierarchy of evidence. The primary source for explaining the Quran is always the Quran itself.
Makes sense. Let the text explain the text.
Right, and then that's followed by authenticated statements of the Prophet Muhammad, and then the consensus of the early generations who actually lived through the revelation.
I get the theory behind that, I really do. But practically speaking, how do you verify what someone said 1,000 years ago? To me, that sounds like the world's longest, most unreliable game of telephone.
That is such a common critique, but it's precisely why Islamic scholars developed an entirely separate scientific discipline called Ilm al-Riyal.
Which means?
It translates to the science of men, or basically biographical evaluation. Let me give you an idea of how rigorous this actually is. It wasn't just, collecting random quotes in a journal.
Right, it wasn't just hearsay.
No, not at all. Scholars like El-Dahabi audited the entire lifespan of the transmitters. There's this famous historical anecdote in the sources about an early compiler who traveled for months on horseback, crossing brutal desert terrain just to collect a single saying of the Prophet from a specific narrator.
Just for one quote. That is some serious dedication.
It was his life's work. And when the scholar finally arrived at the man's village, he saw the man out in a field trying to catch his runaway horse.
Okay.
And the man was holding up an empty feed bag, pretending there was grain inside, just to trick the animal into coming back.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. The scholar saw that, immediately turned his own horse around, and left without even saying hello.
Wait, really? He abandoned a months-long trip because the guy tricked a horse.
Absolutely, he did. Because the scholar's logic was, if this man is willing to deceive an animal for a minor convenience, I cannot trust him to transmit the words of the divine.
Wow, that is a zero-tolerance policy for lying.
That is the level of empirical scrutiny applied to the historical data. If a narrator had a failing memory in their old age, or if they had a known political agenda, or this is a big one, if they claimed to hear a quote from someone who died before they were born.
Which obviously means they were making it up.
Exactly. That data was flagged, categorized, or entirely discarded. This ensures that the historical context of Surah at-Tinnis isn't some mystical guesswork. It is rock-solid data.
Okay, that definitely makes me view this giant stack of books a lot differently. So we have this unbroken chain of verified transmission. Who are the heavyweights we're relying on for this deep dive?
Well, we're looking at a layered evolution of thought. We start with the formative classical scholars, right, like Al-Tabari.
The Barry comes up a lot.
He is your foundation. He gives us the pure transmission-based definitions. But then, as Islamic civilization expanded and they encountered, Greek philosophy and other intellectual challenges, you get scholastic giants like Fakhr al-Din al-Razi and al-Qurtubi.
Right, they had to defend the faith on an intellectual level.
Exactly. They take Tabari's foundation and apply intense dialectic theology, Aristotelian logic, and juristic ethics to it.
And then, looking at our notes, it seems to get very internal. When we get to scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim, their work reads less like a legal text and more like, I don't know, spiritual cardiology.
That's a really great way to put it. They are diagnosing the diseases of the soul.
Yeah.
And all of that historical and spiritual groundwork ultimately feeds into the contemporary scholars we are analyzing today, figures like Sayyid Qutbaz and modern linguists like Nouman Ali Khan.
Who basically bridge the gap to today.
Right. They are taking this ancient, meticulously preserved text and applying it directly to modern socio-political structures and modern psychological crises.
Okay, so before we look at the actual Arabic of Surah at-Tin, let's establish the ground reality. Where and when is this dropping into history? Because if we don't know the environment, we can't really understand the medicine, right?
That's vital. The environment here is early Makkah, and you really have to strip away any romanticized notions of what that looked like.
It wasn't just people sitting around having peaceful theological debates.
Not at all. The nascent Muslim community is incredibly small at this point, and they are completely surrounded by the Quraysh, which was this entrenched, polytheistic elite whose entire economic and social dominance relied heavily on the status quo.
Right, because Makkah was this massive pagan pilgrimage site.
Right.
It's basically their main source of income.
Exactly. It was a massive economy. So when the Prophet Muhammad begins preaching absolute monotheism, it isn't just a theological disagreement.
Bad for business.
It is a direct threat to the Quraysh's wallet and their tribal supremacy. So the pushback wasn't a polite debate in the town square. It was horrific, systemic persecution.
Just brutal stuff.
We are talking about severe economic boycotts, where early Muslims were literally starving in a valley outside the city. They faced targeted psychological warfare and the brutal physical torture of the weakest members of society, the slaves and the impoverished who had accepted the message.
That paints a really dark, claustrophobic picture. So into this intense pressure cooker, Surah at-Tin is revealed. It must have served a very specific survival function for those early believers.
It functioned as an absolute lifeline for them. I mean, imagine being treated as less than human, tortured because of your beliefs, told daily by the wealthy elite that you are worthless.
Or destroy your psyche.
And then this revelation descends. It is an ontological defense of their human dignity. It explicitly tells the oppressed, your worth is not dictated by the socio-economic hierarchy of Makkah. Your design is divinely validated.
Wow.
And simultaneously, it acts as a surgical strike against the oppressors, dismantling their arrogance and exposing their moral bankruptcy.
There is a really compelling detail in the sources regarding how the Prophet Muhammad himself utilized this chapter.
Ah, yes.
The authenticated hadith collections of Imam Ahmad, Bukhari, and Muslim, they all record that the Prophet heavily favored reciting Surah at-Tin while he was traveling.
That's a very specific context.
Right. There's a specific companion, Al-Bara bin Azib, who explicitly noted hearing the Prophet recited on a journey, and he even remarked on the profound beauty of his voice. But the travel aspect is what really caught my attention. Why pull out this specific 8-verse chapter when you are on the road?
Think about the psychology of travel, especially back in the ancient world. When you travel, you are stripped of all your illusions of control.
You leave your bubble.
You leave the security of your walled home, your community, your daily routine. You are entirely exposed to the elements, to the possibility of bandits, to sheer physical exhaustion. You are in a state of profound vulnerability.
I mean, even today, traveling kind of strips away your comfort zones. Flights get delayed, you lose your luggage, you're entirely dependent on strangers.
Precisely. Now magnify that by 1,000 for desert travel in the 7th century. By habitually reciting this surah during those moments of physical vulnerability, the prophet was deeply connecting with the chapter's core theme, the ultimate, unavoidable journey of the human soul.
Because the surah itself is a journey.
It maps the entire trajectory from the perfection of our initial creation through the dangerous, degrading pitfalls of worldly life, all the way to the final destination of divine judgment. Reciting it on a physical journey is this constant psychological anchor reminding you of your existential journey.
That is a phenomenal setup. Let's actually dive into the text now. The opening is incredibly dramatic. Verses 1 through 3 consist of 4 rapid-fire divine oaths.
Right.
The Quran says, by the fig and the olives, and by Mount Sinai, and by this secure city. I know from our research that when God takes an oath in classical Arabic Amen, it's like a massive structural red flag.
It is the ultimate rhetorical attention grabber. An oath in this context is a structural mechanism declaring that what follows is a paradigm-shifting truth. You need to wake up and listen.
But what is truly fascinating here is the subject of the oaths. I mean, the creator of the cosmos isn't swearing by black holes or galaxies or even his own unseen majesty. He's swearing by a fig.
And an olive.
Which sparked one of the most interesting scholarly debates in our source material. I was reading the commentary by the early formative scholars, guys like Mujahid and Hassan al-Basri, and they take this incredibly literally.
They do.
They argue that when the Quran says, by the fig and the olive, it means the literal botanical fruits that you eat, just the fruit on your table.
And there is a profound grounding wisdom in that literal interpretation. If we look through that lens, the oaths are a masterclass in recognizing divine providence in our daily sustenance.
Okay, let's look at the fig first, because the historical traditions, specifically those highlighted in works like Tafsir al-Jalain, show that early scholars revered the fig almost as a remnant of paradise.
Yes.
And the reason is so simple but blew my mind. It has no pit. I had never thought about that until I read the notes. Like a date has a pit, a peach has a pit, an apple has a core, but a fig, it is 100% consumable.
That exact physical property was seen as a profound metaphor by the scholars. The fig represents pure, unadulterated sustenance.
Zero waste.
Zero waste? Every single fiber of it is designed to benefit the human body. It is an act of sheer, concentrated, divine generosity.
And then you contrast that with the olive. The Quran actually praises the olive in another chapter, Surah An-Nur, as coming from a blessed tree.
The olive was essential to their survival.
It's like the ultimate multi-tool of the ancient world, right?
Yeah.
You press it, and the oil provides dense medicinal and nutritional energy for the physical body. But historically, it also fueled the lamps. It quite literally provided light for human civilization to function after dark.
So the literalist camp is essentially telling the listener, before you get lost in high-level theological concepts, look down at your plate.
Look at your breakfast.
Look at the meticulous, intelligent design in the fuel that keeps your heart beating and your home illuminated. If God took such flawless care in designing a piece of fruit for your survival, how much more care did he take in designing your soul?
I really appreciate that perspective. I do. But I have to admit, it feels a little disjointed when you read the very next 2 verses. We go from a literal fruit plate to Mount Sinai and the secure city.
It is a sharp pivot.
Right. Those are massive, world-altering geographical locations.
Yeah.
Jumping from a literal snack to the mountain where Moses spoke to God feels rhetorically jarring.
And that exact rhetorical friction is why the heavyweight systematic theologians, scholars like Al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, Ibn Taymiyyah, and later Sayyid Qutb champion a completely different view.
The geographical view.
Yes. They argue for a geographical symbolic interpretation based on the classical Arabic linguistic rule of synecdoche.
Okay, synecdoche being when you use a part of something to represent the whole.
Correct. It's a very common rhetorical device in many languages. If a news anchor says, Wall Street reacted negatively today, no one thinks a literal paved street in New York had an emotional reaction.
Right. They know Wall Street is a synecdoche for the entire American financial sector.
Exactly. Similarly, classical Arabic rules dictate that if a sequence of oaths ends with undeniable geographical locations, like Sinai and Makkah, The preceding items must belong to the same category to maintain thematic cohesion.
So the fig and the olive aren't just fruits on a table. They represent the land where they most famously grow.
That's the argument. Foundational exegetes like Kab, Al-Abar, and Katara assert that the fig and the olive symbolize the Levant region, specifically Jerusalem, Palestine, and Greater Syria.
Which means these three verses aren't just a random lift. They are a highly specific geographical map.
A topographical map of Revelation, yes.
And if we trace this map, it outlines the entire unbroken lineage of major monotheistic prophecy. Walk me through this topography step by step.
Let's follow the map chronologically as the scholars lay it out. The first stop is the Levant, represented by the fig and the olive. The primary prophetic association here is Prophet Isa, or Jesus. Now, what was the core nature of Isa's mission? The society he was sent into had become hyper-materialistic. They had corrupted the spirit of the law for financial gain. So his message was intensely focused on asceticism.
Healing the soul.
Exactly. Spiritual purification and cleansing the diseases of the heart. The fig and olive, growing in that region, symbolize that internal spiritual revival.
Then we move to verse 2. And by Mount Sinai, or Tur Sinin in Arabic, geographically we are in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. The prophet is Musa, Moses. But the theological vibe here is completely different from the asceticism of Isa.
It is entirely different. Mount Sinai is the locus of direct, terrifyingly powerful divine communication. Musa is literally known in the tradition as Kalimullah, the one who spoke directly with Allah.
Right.
And what happens at Sinai? Moses receives the law, the Sharia. The Israelites have just been liberated from the brutal physical tyranny of Pharaoh. Asceticism alone doesn't govern a newly freed nation.
They need rules.
They need objective external justice. They need a legal code to structure society. So Mount Sinai represents the establishment of absolute objective justice and law.
Which brings us to the final stop on the map, verse 3. And by this secure city, Al-Bala al-Amin, we are in Makkah. And the prophetic associations here are Ibrahim, who originally built the Kaaba there, and Muhammad, who is currently receiving this revelation within its borders.
Makkah represents the ultimate synthesis. It takes the profound internal spiritual purification of Isa in the Levant, merges it with the rigorous, objective legal justice of Musa at Sinai, and finalizes it into a universal, complete system of life.
It brings the internal and external together.
Yes, it is the sanctuary where the human soul finds both internal peace and external justice.
I want to pause there for a second because our sources from contemporary linguists, specifically Nouman Ali Khan, point out something about the Arabic phrasing used for these locations that honestly gave me chills.
It's a fascinating detail.
It's regarding the phrase for Mount Sinai, Tur Sinin. Explain the linguistic reality of what the Prophet Muhammad is doing when he recites that specific word.
To appreciate this, you really have to remember who the Prophet Muhammad was contextually. He was an Ummi, an unlettered man. He could not read or write.
Right, he wasn't a scholar.
He was born, raised, and living in the middle of the harsh Arabian desert, which was an environment almost entirely insulated from the academic, textual traditions of the Judeo-Christian world. He wasn't spending his weekends in ancient libraries studying the morphological syntax of dead languages.
He was a merchant. He was a shepherd.
Exactly. Yet, when the Quran references Mount Sinai here, it uses the term Tur Sinin. In Hebrew antiquity, the mountain was known by highly specific, nuanced dialectical variations, primarily Sin and Sina. The Quran perfectly reproduces the exact ancient Hebrew morphological variation.
I mean, for an unlettered Arab to just casually drop ancient Hebrew syntax into a rhythmic, poetic Arabic recitation, that would be like me suddenly speaking flawless Navajo during a casual conversation about the weather.
It's jarring.
It is completely inexplicable without a divine source.
For the Judeo-Christian scholars who were living in the Arabian Peninsula at the time, hearing that specific pronunciation from Muhammad was a profound shock. It was an undeniable linguistic proof that he wasn't just making up stories based on rumors he heard from passing caravans. He had access to the omniscient source of history itself.
And the linguistic precision doesn't stop there. Nouman Ali Khan points out a deeply emotional, almost psychological detail regarding the secure city, Makkah. He compares the phrasing in Surah At-Tin with another chapter entirely, Surah Al-Balad. Tell me about the missing word.
This is where we see how intimately the Quran interacts with the emotional reality of the prophet. In Surah Al-Balad, Allah also swears an oath by the city of Makkah. But in that chapter, the word Amin, which translates to secure or safe, is deliberately omitted.
It's just left out.
The verse simply reads, I swear by this city, Why? Because at the specific time Surah al-Balad was revealed, Makkah was a nightmare for the prophet. He was actively being hunted, mocked, and violently persecuted in its streets. The city, quite literally, was not secure for him.
The text reflects his trauma in real time. But here, in Surah at-Tin, the word is back by this secure city.
Yes. Here, the Quran restores the word to emphasize the intended sanctity and the divine mandate of Makkah. In the brutal tribal warfare of pre-Islamic Arabia, blood feuds lasted for generations.
Just endless cycles of revenge.
Exactly. Yet Makkah was universally recognized as a sanctuary. A man could walk into the precincts of the Kaaba, lock eyes with the man who murdered his own father, and he would not dare draw his sword. The sanctity of the city forced even the most violent men to suppress their rage.
So by calling it the secure city here,
By calling it that, God is reminding the oppressors of Makkah. You are violating the sacred sanctuary that I established. You are corrupting the very place meant to be the ultimate safe haven.
okay, so let's pull all of this together. We have these massive oaths. God is swearing by the pure spiritual asceticism of the Levant, the objective legal justice of Mount Sinai, and the ultimate sanctuary of Makkah. Why? What is the through line here for you, the listener?
Look closely at what God chose not to swear by.
Right.
He didn't swear by angels or the throne or the heavens. He swore by dirt. He swore by specific geographical locations on earth where human beings, the prophets, managed to achieve the absolute zenith of spiritual, moral, and ethical perfection.
He is using human history to validate human potential.
Precisely. The oaths are a build-up to a radical declaration about you, the listener. God is establishing a historical precedent. He is saying, do not ever tell me that true righteousness is impossible for humans. Do not say it's too hard.
We have the receipts.
Yes, look at Isa, look at Musa, look at Ibrahim and Muhammad. They were flesh and blood just like you. They walked on the same earth, and they achieved moral perfection because they anchored themselves to my guidance.
Which is the perfect drum roll for verse 4. This is the Jawab al-Qasam, the core thesis that all these oaths were setting up. Verse 4 declares, "Verily, we created man in the best stature." In Arabic, a sunny taqweem.
It's a huge statement.
Now, this is a beautiful phrase, but what does it actually mean mechanistically?
To understand the mechanics, we have to drill down into the Arabic root of the word taqweem.
Because it doesn't just mean looking nice.
No, it doesn't just mean a nice shape or looking good. The root implies the establishment of something with flawless symmetrical balance, ultimate stability, and a deeply purposeful functional design. You only use a word derived from this root when the form perfectly matches the intended function.
And our sources divide their analysis of this best stature into two distinct arenas. First, there's the anatomical, physical view championed by early scholars like al-Tabari and Ibn Kathir. Let's talk about the physical engineering of the human body for a second.
If you do a comparative analysis across the entire spectrum of living creatures on Earth, the physical design of the human being is a bizarre outlier.
We're weird.
We really are. Almost all animals are engineered to navigate their environment horizontally. Their anatomical structure perpetually draws their face downward toward the dirt.
Their posture reflects their fundamental biological limitation. They are tethered to the ground, constantly sniffing out food, tracking predators, securing mates. Their entire existence is a horizontal loop of survival.
But humanity is engineered with an upright bipedal posture. Our heads are physically lifted away from the earth. We possess a forward-looking, expansive field of vision. This bipedal uprightness isn't an accident. It is the physical prerequisite for environmental mastery. We don't just look at the dirt. We look at the horizon. We look at the stars and chart navigation.
And mechanically, because we are standing on 2 feet, our hands are liberated from the task of walking, which is huge.
Exactly. The unparalleled manual dexterity of the human hand. No other earthly creature possesses the ability to manipulate matter with such a terrifying combination of delicate precision and immense power. Think about what the human hand does.
It's crazy when you really think about it.
We use it to forge steel, to construct towering architecture, to perform microscopic open heart surgery, and to paint breathtaking art. The physical design of a sunny taqweem is a masterpiece of functional engineering designed for stewardship.
I love the biological appreciation there. I really do. But as our sources, particularly Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, point out, if we stop at biology, we are completely missing the point.
Absolutely.
Because if best stature just means having a straight spine, opposable thumbs, and good eyesight, then, a silverback gorilla is giving us a run for our money.
Yeah.
There has to be something more than just anatomy.
Al-Razi brings his mastery of philosophy to bear right here. He argues that the true essence of a Sani Takwim is entirely internal. It is the unparalleled cognitive and moral capacity of the human soul.
And this idea is later expanded into a massive magnum opus by Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya in his work Mistadar al-Saada, which translates to The Key to the House of Happiness.
It's a brilliant work.
Walk me through Ibn Qayyim's framework here, because it completely reframes how we view human consciousness.
Ibn Qayyim builds his argument on the Islamic concept of the fitra. The fitra is the foundational, unadulterated operating system of the human soul.
Like our factory setting.
Exactly. It is our innate, factory-setting disposition to recognize objective truth, to feel a natural inclination toward justice, and fundamentally, to consciously desire to submit to the divine.
And he uses this brilliant comparative model to show why having this fitra makes humans the absolute apex of creation. He compares us to angels and then to animals.
It is a phenomenal thought experiment. Let's start with angels. In Islamic theology, angels are beings of immense intellect and absolute unwavering obedience to God. But here is the catch. They have no base desires.
None at all.
None. They don't experience hunger, fatigue, ego, greed, or sexual desire. They don't have to fight temptation to do the right thing because doing the right thing is their only biological and spiritual setting. It requires no effort.
They're essentially perfectly programmed light. They literally can't disobey.
Yes. Now look at the other end of the spectrum. Animals. Animals possess powerful base biological desires. They hunt, they hold food, they fight for dominance, they reproduce. But they lack a higher moral intellect.
Right. A lion does not experience an existential crisis or moral guilt after ripping the throat out of gazelle. It's not going to therapy for that.
No, it is just operating on its instinctual programming. It's just hungry.
And then caught right in the middle, you have us.
Humans are the ultimate cosmic synthesis. We possess the high transcendent intellect of the angels. We can ponder infinity, we can perceive the divine, we understand justice. But simultaneously, we are burdened with the exact same base, biological, animalistic desires as the beasts. We feel intense greed, crushing ego, violent rage, and insatiable lust.
We are a battlefield. We're literally torn between these two extremes.
We are the only creation that has to actively fight itself. And this is why Ibn Qayyim argues we are the best stature. Because when a human being, riddled with anxiety, tempted by greed, exhausted by biological desires, uses their free will to consciously subjugate those animalistic urges in order to align with their higher moral intellect and obey God.
That's the key.
That conscious choice elevates them to a status that even the angels marvel at. The angels bow to humanity not because we are stronger, but because our righteousness requires a bloody internal war that they never have to fight.
Okay, this sounds incredibly noble. I mean, I feel great about humanity hearing that, but I need to push back here, hard.
Go for it.
Because we're sitting in a studio talking about human beings having this angelic moral capacity, this beautiful fitra.
Yeah.
But I open my phone, I look at the history of the 20th century, genocides, atomic bombs, systemic exploitation, child labor.
The reality is grim.
Human history is a slaughterhouse. Honestly, saying humans are fundamentally designed for noble righteousness feels borderline delusional when you look at the evidence. Freud makes way more sense to me when he says we are just savage animals with better weapons, driven by libido and dominance. How do the scholars reconcile the best stature with the absolute horrors of reality?
Your skepticism is incredibly valid, and it is the exact friction point that modern scholars like Said Qutb and Numan Ali Khan address. They use verse 4 to mount a devastating intellectual counterattack against that exact post-Enlightenment Freudian psychological nihilism.
Because the secular worldview fundamentally assumes that the human default is selfishness.
Exactly. In the modern secular framework, you are just highly evolved cosmic dust. There is no soul, no fitra. Therefore, morality ideas like empathy, altruism, self-sacrifice are viewed purely as cynical, artificial constructs. Society invented these rules just so we wouldn't murder each other in our sleep.
They see morality as this unnatural constraint placed over our true savage nature.
But Surah at-Tin flips that completely upside down. It shatters that premise entirely. By formally declaring that humanity's base, unadulterated state is the best stature, the Quran establishes that human beings are fundamentally intrinsically noble. Your empathy, your disgust at injustice, your desire to help a stranger, those are not artificial rules you were taught. They are your factory settings screaming to be heard.
I really want to unpack the mechanism of that.
Yeah.
Because if our default setting is noble, why is there so much suffering? Why do we do such terrible things?
Said Qutb explains the mechanism brilliantly. He argues that when humanity aligns its internal fitra with the external, objective truth of the universe, meaning aligning our lives with the laws of the Creator, we operate at peak efficiency. We function seamlessly.
Yeah.
But when a human being uses their free will to rebel against their own design, when they suppress their higher intellect and decide to live purely to feed their animalistic, base desires, they introduce violent friction into the system.
It's like trying to run complex architectural software on an operating system meant for a basic calculator. The system doesn't just run poorly, it violently crashes.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The brutality, the systemic oppression, the psychological epidemics of anxiety and depression we see in the modern world, these are not proofs that the human design is fundamentally flawed.
They're symptoms.
They are the catastrophic symptoms of a system crashing because it is being forced to run counter to its own programming. The suffering of the world is the exact consequence of abandoning Asani Taqwim.
So the takeaway from verse 4 is intensely empowering, but it also strips away all our excuses.
It does.
If you ever feel utterly worthless because of how society treats you, this verse is your shield. The Creator of the universe has objectively validated your structural and spiritual perfection. But at the exact same time, it's a terrifying mandate. You cannot excuse your bad behavior by saying, "I'm only human, I can't help it." No, your design demands superior conduct.
Which perfectly sets up the brutal whiplash of the very next verse.
Oh, verse 5 is a nightmare. We spend all this time building up the human ego, celebrating our perfect design, and then verse 5 violently yanks the rug out.
It's very abrupt.
Then we reduce him to the lowest of the low.
Oh.
In Arabic, asfala safilin.
This verse is the epicenter of one of the deepest interpretative chasms in classical exegesis. Scholars look at this devastating plunge from the absolute peak of creation down to the lowest of the low, and they aggressively debate the nature of this fall.
Is it physical or is it moral?
Exactly. Is this describing a tragic biological inevitability, or is it describing a catastrophic moral condemnation?
Let's examine the biological interpretation first, because honestly, it is incredibly humbling. Heavyweights like Ibn Abbas, who was the Prophet's cousin and a master of exegesis, along with Ikrimah, championed this view. They argue that asfala safilin is a brutally honest description of human entropy. It's the geriatric view.
Trace the physical arc of a human life. You start wreck, you grow, and eventually you peak. You reach the height of your physical strength, your cognitive processing is lightning fast, you are biologically at Asani Taqwim.
You're in your prime.
But from that very moment of peaking, an invisible clock starts ticking and entropy begins. It is inescapable.
I mean, I was feeling pretty arrogant about my best stature until I slept at a slightly weird angle last night and woke up unable to turn my neck. The entropy is real.
Yes, it happens to everyone. The muscles slowly atrophy. The spine that proudly gave you that upright bipedal dominance begins to curve back toward the earth. The brilliant intellect that built companies or wrote books begins to fog, slipping into dementia.
It's sad reality.
Eventually, if you live long enough, you deteriorate into a state of total infant-like dependence. You cannot feed yourself. You cannot clean yourself. You become the absolute lowest in terms of biological vitality.
It's a very depressing way to look at aging, but the scholars pull a highly practical, urgent lesson from it. It's a massive wake-up call about how we spend our time. Your youth, your sharp mind, your healthy joints, they're a depreciating asset.
It won't last forever.
They have a hard expiration date. If you spend your peak biological years chasing hollow materialism or just binge-watching entertainment, you will wake up one day in asfala safilin with absolutely nothing spiritual to show for the vitality you were given.
The urgency is profound. However, as compelling as the biological view is, there's a second camp of scholars, figures like Mujahid, Al-Hasan al-Basri, Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, and Ibn Taymiyyah, who fiercely argue that reducing this verse to just getting old is a massive theological mistake. They take the moral, spiritual view.
But why do they reject the biological view? Aging seems like a pretty clear, logical interpretation.
Because of a glaring theological paradox. Al-Razi points this out using pure logic. He says, look at the prophets, look at Muhammad, look at Ibrahim, look at the most righteous, beloved men and women in human history. They all aged. They got sick, they lost their memories, they became physically weak. If asfala safilin is merely biological aging, then God is punishing the most beloved people on earth with the exact same degradation as the worst tyrants. That contradicts divine justice.
Wow. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The descent has to be tied to human behavior,
No.
not just the passage of time.
Exactly. The moral camp argues that free will is a double-edged sword. Yes, it allows you to consciously rise above the angels, but if a human being takes their perfect fitra, their brilliant intellect, and uses it to systematically exploit others, to hoard wealth while people starve, to deny their creator, their moral depravity plunges them into a state far lower than animals.
Because an animal kills out of instinct. A human being builds concentration camps out of sheer calculated malice.
Precisely. And contemporary linguists like Nouman Ali Khan point to the specific Arabic verb used here to lock in this moral interpretation. The verb is radadnahu, which is usually translated as we reduce him or we return him. But there's a much more aggressive nuance to the root word, rad, right?
Right, the root rad does not imply a slow, natural, passive decline. It doesn't mean to slowly wither away. In classical Arabic syntax, it carries the explicit aggressive connotation of violently rejecting something because it has become fundamentally defective and unacceptable.
That is terrifying.
It is. God is saying, I crafted you in absolute perfection. I gave you the highest intellect. I placed you on a pedestal. But because you took my gifts and used them to fuel your own arrogance and cruelty, your behavior has rendered you utterly unacceptable. I am actively casting you down from the pedestal. It is an active, divine rejection.
The mechanism of the spiritual descent reminds me of a gravitational pull.
How so?
Imagine you are in a wide, fast-moving river, swimming upstream. As long as you are actively paddling with all your strength, you are making progress. But the absolute second you stop paddling, if you just decide to take a break and tread water, you don't stay in place. The massive current of the river immediately grabs you and violently sweeps you backward.
That is a phenomenal analogy for what classical scholar Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali calls spiritual entropy. In his encyclopedic work, Latif al-Marif, he does a deep dive into the mechanics of the human heart. And he concludes that the heart is never static. There is no neutral gear in spirituality.
You are either ascending or you are descending.
Precisely. Ibn Rajab analyzes the intense, almost obsessive spiritual habits of the Salaf, the earliest generations of Muslims. He documents their relentless commitment to voluntary fasting, night prayers, and constant charity.
And why did they push themselves so hard?
Because they intuitively understood the gravitational pull of asfala saphaline. They knew that the human ego is lazy, that base desires are heavy, and that society is designed to distract you. If you don't maintain a proactive, rigorous daily discipline to thrust your soul upward, the default trajectory of human life in a materialistic world is a slow, unnoticeable descent into the lowest of the low.
If you aren't paddling, you are drowning. And Sayyid Qutb takes this intensely personal, micro-level spiritual entropy and scales it up to diagnose the macro-level collapse of entire civilizations.
Let's talk about that macro level, because Qutb's analysis is chillingly relevant today.
He argues that asfala saphaline is not just the fate of an individual sinner. It is the inevitable destination of any society that unmoors itself from divine ethical parameters. When a nation decides that economic profit is its highest god, when it replaces the fitra with unrestrained capitalism and moral relativism, the society actively regresses into high-tech barbarism.
We see the symptoms of that everywhere. Structural poverty, human trafficking, the absolute destruction of the environment for quarterly profits. We are highly educated, but we are acting like predators.
That is the macro manifestation of the lowest of the low. The technological advancements don't matter if the moral core has collapsed. But just as the Surah brings us to the absolute edge of this terrifying, inescapable abyss, verse 6 throws out a singular, unbreakable lifeline.
Verse 6 of the exception clause is this: except those who believe and do righteous deeds, for them is a reward uninterrupted. The Arabic phrase for the reward is khayru mamnun.
Let's break down the conditions for avoiding the abyss first. It requires two things: belief, iman, and righteous deeds, al-masali.
This verse is the bedrock of Orthodox Sunni theology because it permanently destroys the idea that faith is purely internal. There is an inextricable, non-negotiable symbiosis between cognitive belief and tangible action.
You cannot just sit on your couch, feel a warm, fuzzy spiritual connection to the universe, and claim you have iman.
Exactly. Al-Qurtubi, whose exegesis is famously pragmatic and legally focused, is brutally clear on this point. He argues that a passive, purely intellectual acknowledgement that God exists is utterly useless against the violent gravitational pull of asfala saphaline.
It's not enough to just know it.
Right. Real faith must act as a chemical catalyst. If it enters the heart, it must logically precipitate ethical, physical action in the real world.
And al-Dahabi takes us a step further. He actually uses this verse to critique certain extreme mystical movements, right?
Oh. He does. He critiques heterodox esoteric approaches that try to divorce internal enlightenment from external religious obligations. He says, look at what the text demands. Righteous deeds. These aren't just abstract feelings of love. In the Islamic legal framework, righteous deeds are actions that actively uphold the maqasid al-Sharia, the higher objectives of divine law.
Unpack those objectives for the listener. What does a righteous deed look like systemically?
The higher objectives are the preservation of life, the protection of human intellect, the safeguarding of lineage and family, the defense of personal property, and the upholding of freedom of religion. A righteous deed is any action, whether it's giving $1 to an orphan, writing legislation to protect workers, or physically defending the innocent, that secures these rights.
Verse 6 is a mandate for an integrated life. Your internal devotion must manifest as external justice.
Belief without action is hypocrisy, and action without belief is a hollow performance. Now let's look at the second half of verse 6, the description of the reward. For them is a reward uninterrupted. Khairu mamdun.
This is a beautiful part of the surah.
But I have a serious question about this. What makes it uninterrupted? Because human life is defined by interruptions. We build a great habit of going to the gym, and then we tear a ligament, we start giving charity, and then we lose our job. If our deeds are constantly interrupted by the chaos of life, how can the reward be uninterrupted?
The answer to that question reveals the most profound layer of divine mercy in the entire chapter. The scholars analyze this on two distinct levels, the juristic and the psychological. Let's look at the juristic level first, which it connects beautifully back to the biological tragedy of aging we discussed in verse 5.
Right, the idea that our bodies inevitably fail us.
Yes. Classical authorities like Ibn Abbas deduce a staggering legal reality from the phrase Gairu Memnun. Imagine a young, healthy believer. They establish rigorous habits. They fast twice a week. They volunteer at the soup kitchen. They wake up in the middle of the night to pray. They do this for decades.
They're building a massive spiritual portfolio.
But then they hit 80 years old, dementia sets in, their knees give out. They physically cannot stand in prayer. They are too frail to fast.
Their physical ability to do the righteous deeds is completely interrupted.
But God's accounting system is not bound by biology. God's infinite mercy dictates a specific rule for this person. Because their heart still possesses the will to do the deed, and only their biological vessel failed them, God commands the angels to continue writing their daily reward exactly as if they were still performing those actions with the strength of their youth.
That is mind-blowing. The physical body decays, but the spiritual 401k continues to compound with absolute perfection.
The reward remains totally uninterrupted by physical entropy. But then there is the second level, the linguistic and psychological brilliance of the word mamnun. To understand it, we have to look at the root word mana.
Which relates to giving a favor, but with a very specific toxic string attached.
Precisely. Mana implies a favor accompanied by reproach, or what we would call a guilt trip. Let's look at human psychology. When someone does you a massive favor, let's say you are bankrupt and a wealthy friend pays off your mortgage, how does that alter the relationship?
Oh, it changes everything. Even if they don't mean to, there is a massive power imbalance. You constantly feel a psychological burden. You feel inferior around them. And worse, if you ever disagree with them, they might weaponize the gift and say, after everything I've done for you.
That exact toxic dynamic is mana. It is charity that chips away at the recipient's dignity. When God promises that paradise is Gairu Mamnun, he is promising a reward completely devoid of reproach. God will grant the believer eternal life, unimaginable luxury, and total peace, and he will never, ever guilt-trip them for it. He will never remind them of the sins they committed on earth to make them feel small.
He protects their psychological dignity for all eternity. It is pure, unadulterated generosity.
Modern scholars like Omar Suleiman and Yasir Qadhi draw a very practical daily lesson from this. They argue that the secret to unlocking this uninterrupted reward is consistency. It doesn't require massive heroic acts every day. It requires building a tiny, unbreakable baseline of worship, a small daily prayer, a consistent minor charity. That consistency builds a spiritual reservoir.
So when the inevitable interruptions of life hit you, grief, job loss, illness, that reservoir keeps the water flowing.
It is the ultimate spiritual insurance policy, and that brings us to the breathtaking, terrifying conclusion of the surah.
We have mapped the historical geography, we explored the biological and spiritual perfection of our design, we stared into the abyss of our own decay, and we grab the lifeline of consistent faith. Now, the entire tone of the surah shifts. It stops making statements and starts asking piercing questions.
Verses 7 and 8 are structural interrogations designed to shatter human cognitive dissonance.
Verse 7 says, "So what yet causes you to deny the recompense?" The Arabic word used here is ad-din. Now, usually we translate deen simply as religion, like Islam or Christianity. But in this specific context, it means something much more concrete.
In classical Quranic Arabic, Adin in this phrasing explicitly refers to the day of final judgment. It is the day of ultimate accounting and recompense. And Fakhr al-Din al-Razi's teleological mastery is on full display when he explains why this verse logically follows everything we just discussed.
For the listener who might not be deep into philosophy, unpack teleology real quick and then explain how Razi uses it here.
Teleology is essentially the philosophical study of purpose. It looks at the intricate design of a thing to understand its ultimate goal. Razi says, let's review the data the surah just presented. First, God demonstrated the flawless, mathematically complex, biological, and cognitive design of the human being Asani Taqwim. Design that complex implies a profound purpose. You don't build a supercomputer just to use it as a paperweight.
Okay, humans have a purpose.
Second, God established the stark, undeniable variance in how humans use their free will. You have people who sacrifice their lives to protect orphans, and you have people who commit mass genocide. Both possess the exact same biological design, but they utilize their free will in diametrically opposed ways.
Mother Teresa and Joseph Stalin both had the same upright bipedal posture and cognitive hardware.
Exactly. So Ibn Qayyim steps in and looks at the reality of the temporal world we currently inhabit. Is this world fair? Absolutely not. It is inherently fractured and chaotic. History is entirely saturated with brilliant, righteous people who were tortured, starved, and died in obscurity. And simultaneously, history is full of brutal tyrants who lived in absolute luxury, hoarded wealth, and died peacefully in their sleep, surrounded by doctors.
The mathematical equation of justice in this world does not balance. The bad guys win all the time.
And that is the crux of the teleological argument. Ibn Qayyim argues that if there is no day of judgment, if there is no deen to eventually rectify these gross cosmic imbalances, then the creation of humanity was a futile, cruel joke. If the tyrant and the martyr both just end up as dust in the ground with no final accounting, then the flawless design of the human intellect and the entire lineage of prophets sent to teach justice were absolutely meaningless.
And conceptually, an omniscient, perfect creator does not engage in meaningless, chaotic exercises.
Exactly. So, Verse 7 isn't just a fiery threat. It is a direct appeal to pure logic. It asks the skeptic, having witnessed the staggering complexity of your own biological design and knowing the unyielding human desire for fairness, how can you arrogantly assume the Creator lacks either the power or the moral will to resurrect you and balance the scales?
It demands a final settlement, which leads us to the final resounding note of the entire chapter. Verse 8 asks, "Is not Allah the most just of judges?" The Arabic is Ahkam al-Hakimin.
This single verse acts as the ultimate psychological armor for the victim and the ultimate existential terror for the oppressor. It is the absolute guarantee that the math of the universe will balance down to the subatomic level.
I really want to dive into the linguistic roots of Ahkam al-Hakimin because it reveals exactly how that math is going to balance. The word Ahkam is a superlative noun, and what fascinated me in the research is that it derives its power simultaneously from two distinct but connected Arabic roots, hukm and hikmah. Explain the difference because it changes everything about how we view divine justice.
This is one of the most beautiful linguistic nuances in Islamic theology. Let's start with hukm. Hukm translates to sovereign authority, sheer executive power, and the absolute jurisdiction to enforce a ruling. When God operates with hukm, it means his court cannot be bought. You cannot bribe the judge, you cannot hire a clever lawyer to find a loophole, and there is no higher appellate court to overturn his decision. He has absolute power.
But power alone is terrifying. A dictator has absolute power. That doesn't make him a good judge.
Precisely. Power without deep understanding results in tyranny. That is where the second root, hikmah, comes in. Hikmah means profound, penetrating wisdom. It's the ability to understand the hidden, underlying realities of a situation, not just the surface-level optics.
So how do hukm and hikmah combine in God's judgment?
Think about a human court of law. A human judge can only adjudicate based on external evidence, documents, eyewitness testimony, video footage. They cannot see into the mind of the defendant. But Allah, as Ahkam al-Hakimin, possesses absolute hikmah. He doesn't just see your actions. He comprehends the intricate, invisible psychological tapestry of your entire life, He knows the hidden childhood traumas that skewed your decision-making. He understands the socioeconomic disadvantages you inherited. He sees the silent, agonizing internal struggles you fought that nobody else knew about.
He judges you not just by what you did, but by what you had to overcome to do it.
Yes, his judgment is perfectly, flawlessly tailored to the exact reality of every single individual. He combines the absolute, unstoppable power of Hukam with the infinite, empathetic understanding of Hikmah. That is why he is the most just of judges. Every marginalized person who is silenced in this world will have their exact, perfect retribution in his court.
That is incredibly overwhelming to think about. And it brings us to a highly actionable, participatory element of this surah that I found deeply moving. Our sources, specifically an authentic hadith, transmitted by Abu Huraira and heavily emphasized by scholars like Al-Qurtubi, detail how a listener is supposed to physically react when they hear this specific verse.
It is a profound prophetic tradition. The Prophet Muhammad taught that whenever a believer recites or hears this final verse, "Is not Allah the most just of judges?" they should not remain silent. They are instructed to vocally, physically respond. The authenticated response is, "Bala wa ana ala dalika mina shahidin,"
which translates to, yes, indeed. And I am among the witnesses to that. You actually speak back to the text.
You enter into a dialogue with the divine, and modern psychological frameworks show us exactly why this interactive element is so critical. By actively vocalizing this affirmation, you aren't just performing a ritual, you are engaging in continuous cognitive behavioral training.
You are reprogramming your own despair.
Exactly. You turn on the news, you see the horrific inequity of the temporal world, you see innocent people suffering, and your heart wants to break. You want to succumb to nihilism. But by out loud declaring, "Yes, indeed, you are the most just of judges," you are forcing your psyche to internalize the bedrock belief that this worldly chaos is not the end of the story. You are testifying to the absolute certainty of divine justice before you even see it manifest with your physical eyes. It is the ultimate act of defiant hope.
That brings us full circle in such a powerful way. Let's synthesize this incredible journey we've just taken. In the span of just 8 short verses, we have traced the geographical map of monotheistic history, from the spiritual purification of Isa in the Levant to the rigorous justice of Musa at Sinai, to the ultimate sanctuary of Muhammad in Makkah.
We explored the breathtaking anatomical and cognitive engineering of the human being, the Asani Takwim, which makes us capable of outshining the angels.
We stared into the terrifying gravitational abyss of our own biological and moral decay, the Asphalocephaline. We learned how to grab hold of the lifeline of consistent faith and pragmatic action to secure an uninterrupted, guilt-free reward.
And finally, we landed on the unshakable philosophical and theological bedrock, the teleological necessity of a final judgment, overseen by the single most powerful and deeply empathetic judge in existence.
It is an absolute masterclass in human anthropology, spiritual diagnostics, and divine justice. And before we close, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over. As we sifted through the 150 texts for this deep dive, witnessing these massive intellects debate the meanings, debating whether the fig is a literal fruit or a geographical synecdoche, debating whether the lowest of the low is about biological aging or hellfire, we witnessed what scholars refer to as the lexical elasticity of the Quran.
It is a defining miracle of the text.
Think about how staggering it is that a single, multi-layered Arabic phrase in this surah can simultaneously serve as a comforting reminder about the pure sustenance of a piece of fruit, a practical warning about the tragedy of biological aging, a terrifying theological threat about the arrogance of the human ego, and a sweeping socio-political critique of modern society's economic exploitation. It doesn't break under the weight of these different interpretations. It seamlessly accommodates the evolving intellectual, scientific, and emotional needs of human civilization, century after century. It is a text that continuously grows with you.
The deeper you dig, the more it yields. It is an inexhaustible ocean.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you with goodness for spending your valuable time listening to us.